Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're tackling a problem that I know a lot of you are dealing with, especially if you're building software.
Yeah.
Should I use a single AWS account for everything?
Yeah.
Or should I split things up into multiple accounts? And it gets even trickier when you think about, like,
Mm.
you've got your production environment where your app's running,
Mhm.
but you also have salespeople who need to demo the product.
Totally. It's a question I get asked all the time, and honestly, there's no easy answer. It really depends on your specific needs.
Yeah, and it's kind of like this constant battle between keeping things simple
Right.
but also making sure everything's secure
Yeah.
and you're not breaking the bank with costs.
Exactly. I think a good place to start is to understand why a lot of people consider multi-account setups to be the ideal.
Okay, yeah. Let's dig into that. What makes it so great?
The biggest advantage is isolation. Imagine you have different parts of your business, like production, development, testing. You can give each of these their own AWS account, and they become like separate
So
compartments.
it's kind of like having, I don't know, separate offices in a building. Each
Exactly.
one has its own lock and key.
Exactly. And what happens in one office stays in that office. So let's say a developer makes a mistake in the testing environment. With multiple accounts, that mistake is contained. It doesn't affect your live production system where your customers are.
Oh, so it's all about limiting that blast radius, right?
You got it. Plus, it's not just about security. Multi-accounts can make your life a lot easier when it comes to managing resources and costs.
Okay, how so?
Well, each AWS account comes with its own set of limits on how much you can use of each service. This means one team can't accidentally hog all the resources and prevent other teams from doing their work.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's kind of like each team gets its own budget.
Yeah, and
What?
you get separate bills for each account. This makes it much easier to see who's spending what and keep track of your costs.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
No more arguing over who left the lights on, huh?
Exactly. And one more thing, compliance. If you're dealing with sensitive data or need to meet certain regulations, having separate accounts can make things a lot easier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So multi-account setups, they seem pretty powerful, but I'm guessing they're not exactly a walk in the park to manage.
You're right, there's definitely a learning curve. But luckily, AWS has tools to help you. One of them is called AWS Organizations.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
Think of it like the control center for all your AWS accounts. It lets you group accounts together, apply policies across multiple accounts at once, and simplify billing. It really helps tame the complexity.
So it sounds like multi-accounts, they offer a lot of benefits, especially for growing companies. But before we dismiss the idea of using a single account, let's talk about why it might still be tempting for some.
For sure. Especially if you're a smaller team just starting out, a single account can be a lot easier to wrap your head around. It's less overhead, fewer things to manage, and it's definitely simpler to get started.
Right. It's sort of like, when you first move out on your own, get
Yeah.
that studio apartment, everything's right there. It's easy to manage.
Exactly. But just like with that studio apartment, as your needs grow and things get more complex, a single account can start to feel a bit cramped.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
Hmm.
So what kind of challenges might you run into if you try to stick with that single account approach as your company grows?
Well, security is a big one. Remember that isolation we talked about with multiple accounts?
Hmm.
In a single account, you lose that. If there's a security issue or a misconfiguration somewhere, it could potentially affect everything.
Yikes. It's kind of like leaving all your doors unlocked, right?
Right. And as you add more applications and users to that single account, you might start to see performance problems. Different workloads could end up competing for the same resources.
Oh, so it's like everyone trying to use the same Wi-Fi at the same time?
Yeah, things start to slow down and eventually something might break. Not ideal.
Not at all. And what about keeping track of costs? That must be a nightmare with everything lumped together in one account.
It can be. Trying to figure out who's spending what becomes really difficult when you have multiple teams or projects sharing the same account.
Oh, so it's like trying to split the bill at a restaurant when everyone ordered different things.
Exactly. And don't even get me started on managing user permissions in a single account. It can quickly become a tangled mess as your team grows.
Okay, so it sounds like while a single account might be okay for small teams or simple projects, as things get more complex, it can create a lot of headaches. More security risks, resource bottlenecks, cost tracking nightmares, and a whole lot of IAM spaghetti to untangle.
You got it. And this is especially true when you factor in things like sales demos.
Right. If you have potential customers interacting with your system, even in a limited way, You need to be extra careful about security and isolation.
Absolutely. You don't want a sales demo accidentally affecting your live production environment or exposing sensitive customer data.
Yeah, that would be a disaster. So how do you find that balance? How do you create an environment that's both secure and user-friendly for sales demos without sacrificing the stability of your production systems?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's what we'll be diving into after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. So let's get into some real-world examples of how these account strategies can play out. Let's say you're a software company. You have a team of engineers building a new product.
Mm-hmm.
You have your production environment where the product's running for your customers.
Right.
And then you also have your sales team who need to be able to demo the product to potential clients. How would you approach this in terms of AWS accounts?
That's a great question. I mean, it sounds like you've got all these different groups with different needs and different levels of access required.
Yeah.
Trying to cram that all into a single AWS account seems, well, messy to say the least.
It definitely can be. This is where the multi-account strategy shines. You can give each of those groups, development, production, and sales, their own dedicated AWS account.
Okay, so like separate sandboxes where they can play without stepping on each other's toes.
Exactly. You get that isolation, so if a developer accidentally breaks something in the development account, it doesn't affect the live product or the sales demos.
Right, that blast radius is contained.
Plus, you can customize each account to fit the specific needs of that group.
I like that. So the development account could have more relaxed security settings
Right.
since it's just for internal use, whereas the production account would be locked down tight to protect customer data.
Exactly. And your sales team could have an account that's pre-configured with demo data and specific features that they want to showcase to potential clients.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like having different departments within a company, each with their own set of rules and procedures,
Yeah,
but they all work together under the umbrella of the organization as a whole.
exactly. And remember, with AWS organizations, you can still manage all these accounts from a central location so you're not completely siloed.
Okay, that's good to know. But what about giving different people access to these accounts? Like, how do you make sure developers can work in the development account, but can't accidentally mess with the production environment?
That's where IAM comes in identity and access management.
Okay, yeah. IAM, I've heard of it, but I'm a little fuzzy on how it all works.
Basically, IAM lets you define very specific permissions for each user. You can say, this developer can do anything they want in the development account, but in the production account, they can only view logs.
Ah, so it's like assigning different security clearances based on someone's role.
Exactly. And you can create different roles for your sales team, giving them access to the demo environment, but restricting their access to sensitive customer data.
Okay, so I can see how powerful that can be. But managing all those different roles and permissions across multiple accounts, it sounds like you get pretty complicated.
It can be, but AWS provides some tools to help you manage it. For example, you can define policies at the organizational unit level in AWS organizations, so you don't have to repeat the same configuration for each individual account.
Oh, that sounds like a huge time saver.
Yeah, and you can use infrastructure as code tools like CloudFormation or Terraform to automate a lot of this.
Okay, so we've got our account set up, our security boundaries in place, and we're managing access with IAM. But let's zoom back in on those sales demos for a second. How do you make sure those are running smoothly and securely while still giving potential customers a good experience?
There are a few different approaches you can take here. One option is to create a brand new AWS account for every single demo.
Wow, okay, so each potential customer gets their own little playground.
Exactly. That provides the ultimate isolation, but it can be a lot to manage if you're doing a high volume of demos.
Right, I can see how that could get out of hand quickly.
Another approach is to have a shared demo environment that multiple customers can access.
Hmm, interesting.
This is more efficient, but you need to be careful about isolating each customer's experience and making sure they can't accidentally mess with each other's data.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want one customer accidentally blowing up someone else's demo.
And you need to think about how you handle authentication and authorization in a shared environment. You might use temporary credentials that expire, or you could implement role-based access control.
Okay, so it's all about finding the right balance between security, efficiency, and user experience.
Exactly. And the right approach will depend on your specific needs and resources. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
That's a good point. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore when it comes to AWS account strategies.
There definitely is. We could talk for hours about advanced security considerations, the power of automation, and the importance of ongoing governance.
Well, let's not keep our listeners in suspense any longer. Let's jump into those more advanced topics in part 3, where we'll equip you with the knowledge to truly master the art of AWS account management. Welcome back. We've talked a lot about the what and the why of AWS account strategies. Now let's get into the how. What are some tools and techniques that can help us actually implement these strategies effectively?
That's a great question. And it's where things get really exciting. We've touched on AWS organizations before, but it's worth diving a little deeper. It's like the command center for your multi-account setup.
Okay, yeah, we've talked about how it can help you group accounts and apply policies, but can you give us a concrete example of how that works in practice?
Sure. Imagine you have a bunch of development accounts, one for each of your engineering teams. You want to make sure they all have the same security standards in place. With organizations, you can create a policy that enforces those standards, things like password requirements or multi-factor authentication, and apply it to all those development accounts at once.
Wow, so instead of manually configuring each account individually, you can set it up once at the organizational level and have it cascade down. That sounds like a massive time saver.
It is. And it helps eliminate inconsistencies and human error. Plus, organizations gives you centralized billing and reporting so you can track costs across all your accounts in one place.
That level of visibility and control is incredibly valuable. But let's be honest, even with organizations, managing a complex multi-account environment can still be a bit overwhelming. Are there ways to automate some of these tasks and make our lives even easier?
Absolutely. That's where infrastructure as code, or IAC, comes in. Tools like CloudFormation and Terraform allow you to define your entire AWS infrastructure, your accounts, your networks, your security settings as code.
Okay, so it's like writing a script for your cloud environment.
Exactly. And then you can use these tools to automatically deploy and manage that infrastructure. This means you can spin up new environments in minutes, ensure consistency across your accounts, and even roll back to previous configurations if needed.
That's amazing. It sounds like a game changer for managing complex cloud setups. But with all this automation and delegation, how do we make sure security doesn't fall through the cracks?
Security should always be top of mind, and it needs to be baked into your account strategy from the start. IAM, or Identity and Access Management, is your best friend here.
Right, IAM, that's where we define those granular permissions for each user.
Exactly. You can control exactly who has access to what resources and what actions they can perform within each account. It's all about the principle of least privilege, only grant the minimum level of access necessary to do the job.
And beyond IAM, there are a bunch of other security services within AWS, right?
Oh, yeah. You can use things like AWS Shield to protect against DDoS attacks, GuardDuty to detect malicious activity, Macie to identify sensitive data, and a whole lot more. It's like having a multi-layered security system for your cloud environment.
That's reassuring. But with all these accounts, policies, and security measures in place, how do we keep track of everything and make sure it's all working as intended? It sounds like we need some kind of cloud governance strategy.
You got it. And AWS has a tool for that AWS Control Tower. It builds on top of organizations and provides pre-configured guardrails and blueprints to help you establish and enforce governance policies across your entire AWS environment.
So Control Tower is like our cloud compliance officer, making sure everyone is following the rules and keeping things secure and organized.
Exactly. It helps you implement best practices from the start and avoids common pitfalls, making it much easier to manage a complex multi-account environment. So whether you're just starting out or you're already running a sophisticated cloud operation, AWS provides a powerful set of tools and services to help you succeed.
That's fantastic. I feel like we've covered so much ground today. We've explored the nuances of single versus multi-account setups, dived into real-world examples, and unpacked a whole toolbox of AWS services to help us manage it all.
It's been a great discussion. The key takeaway is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to AWS account strategies. The best approach for you will depend on your unique needs, your security requirements, and your team's expertise.
Couldn't agree more. It's all about finding the right balance between security, flexibility, and manageability. And remember, the cloud is constantly evolving, so stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to experiment. That's it for our deep dive into AWS account strategies. Thanks for joining us, and happy cloud computing.